So this will be a recorded podcast for the NEREJ, NYREJ podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Buzzsprout. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. This is a Connecticut Opportunities with Legalized Cannabis and Real Estate. As most of us know that have been in markets that have legalized cannabis, understand that there's a lot of great opportunities for the early adapters. I want to thank our sponsors for today. Our corporate sponsors: Inspired Technology, Northmark, Champion Elevator, U.S. Pavement Services, Northeastern Savings Bank, and Margol DeStefano Architects. And that's me, Rick Kaplan, and I host that podcast that I was just talking about. The two of you introduce yourselves and what you do. And we'll start with Elwin.
Yeah, sure. I'm the account executive for Plymouth Armor Group. Plymouth Armor Group is a third-party transporter for cannabis and cash. So we support all license types here in Massachusetts. We currently support Connecticut retailers with cash transport, simply picking up that cash and bringing it to banks. The thing with cash transport is really fitting all transport and logistics to cannabis and making sure it's done in a compliant way. We're about to get going with a warehouse here in Massachusetts and have the largest fleet in the state, and hoping to carry that over into Connecticut soon.
Okay, so does that mean you have warehouses filled with cash?
I wish. It's usually just picking up the cash and dropping at the bank for folks.
Okay. And Berekk, did I say it right?
You got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Berekk Blackwell, COO of Zoned Properties. Zoned is a commercial real estate services group based out of Arizona. We've been around for almost a decade now, serving the cannabis industry specifically. We focus on highly regulated industries. Right now, 99% of our work is in the cannabis space. And really, we have kind of three main functions. So property technology, we do a lot of stuff on mapping and zoning platforms for the cannabis space. Our second arm is real estate services. So we do a lot of site identification work for operators. So people that want to go into a new market, or maybe they want to move locations. I know we're going to get into it a little bit. It's a complicated process. It's not as easy as looking up any sort of commercial property. So we specialize in that. We help operators across the country in about 10 different states right now. And then we're an active buyer as well. So we have a portfolio of properties that we have leased back to cannabis operators. So cannabis-friendly landlord, we're built for it. We plan on participating actively as a buyer in the real estate space, cannabis real estate space, over the next few years.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. Let me just clarify that. So you're purchasing the properties, and then you're leasing it back to a cannabis operator. And the reason is because why?
Yeah, the reason is there's a need for it. At the end of the day, there's a lot of complexity around owning a property that is being used for cannabis, and we can talk about that at any point during today's webinar. But there's a financing component that's complex. not all debt will allow cannabis use within a facility. So the fact that we're 100% focused on that means that we can build our business model around it. So that, and we also understand the complexity around local permitting. So being a resource for our operators as well, not just a passive landlord, being able to offer assistance and kind of guide or assist operators to make sure that they stay compliant and they don't run into any unnecessary roadblocks that could cause delays or business interruption.
Okay, that's very interesting. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about on that.
Yeah.
George, why don't you introduce yourself because we already went through everyone else's.
Sure. My name is George Mautner. I work with Key Construction. We're based in Framingham, Massachusetts, and we have been in business since 2006. We started doing a lot of work in life science and also just regular corporate interiors. In 2016 and 17, we shifted and we got involved in the cannabis space as well. It was a kind of a natural progression from doing life science work. So now a fair portion of the work that we do is in cannabis, doing grow facilities, manufacturing, and retail.
Okay. All right. Before we continue on, I'd like to let everyone know that this is being recorded. It will be on our podcast, NEREJ and NYREJ podcast. As most of you notice, my voice is not what it normally is. So you have to bear with me. At any time I could just lose it. So
We'll bear with you.
So if anyone wants to watch this and listen to my voice over and over again, they'll be able to do so on our podcast, as well as on our YouTube channel, which will be on the NEREJ/NYREJ podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Buzzsprout. Okay, so let's move on for the first question. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of projects and where you have built out a cannabis facility in Connecticut. And I know, George, you're working on one right now, or have.
Sorry, Rick, did you lose your voice or was there more to the question?
Well, a little of both. You didn't get the question?
No, if you can repeat it, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Let's talk about a couple of projects and where you have built out a cannabis facility in Connecticut.
So we have not started yet in Connecticut. We're in planning phases there. So to date, we've been working in Massachusetts.
Are there any projects in the works right now that are, for licensed operators in Connecticut yet?
We haven't started yet. They're being planned as we speak. We should have been started at this point, but not quite yet. So I would guess first of 2023 we'll be starting.
So does anyone know how many licenses have already been issued?
Yeah, I think it was just shy of 20 cultivator licenses were issued last week or the week before.
So this is a very young market and
Yeah,
great
very
opportunities. All right. So that brings us to the next question, which Berekk, you would be able to zoning, permitting, and license in Connecticut.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's relevant to the stage we're in. So like I said in my intro, we do a lot of work with operators, assessing new markets, kind of mapping out the state landscape. and basically saying, based on the state level licensing structure, how should we attack the state from a real estate perspective? So, some of the challenges that operators face when they're dealing with that question. In Connecticut specifically, it was given that you didn't need control of the real estate to apply, how much real estate related work do you want to do before applying? So how much risk do you want to take before you submit your application? So although most of the real estate deals we do pre-application or pre-license are contingent on licensure, there are some costs involved in terms of holding that real estate and appeasing that property owner through the process. So we had clients that were interested in locking up properties as early as last year, even with the risk of not knowing if they were going to get licensed or not. So that's the first question that operators face is, at what stage should I be looking? A majority of them now have decided to wait until they're issued conditional approval. Once they're issued conditional approval, they can go and secure real estate within a time frame. So that's kind of the stage we're in now. Licenses are being issued. The real estate land grab is really heating up now. And now you turn to municipal status. So Connecticut, they had the option to opt in. They had the option to opt out. And they also were given the option to kind of wait and see, issue a moratorium for a certain period of time, kind of wait and let the market evolve a little bit, see what their neighbors are going to do, get some legal advice. And so you can look at that table and basically determine as an operator, okay, these municipalities have opted in, let's focus there. So now you get into, okay, you've picked a municipality to focus on. Now you're getting into zoning and setback related points. So once a municipality is opted in, now they're tasked with, where should we put these cannabis businesses, right? Where should we put these cultivation facilities if we're going to allow that? Where should we put these retail facilities if we're going to allow that? In most cases, they just add cannabis use to the current zoning district table, and they pick existing zones to place them. In some smaller municipalities, they will do a cannabis overlay map where they basically just pick the parcels that they want the businesses to reside in. So that varies. And then the next step is how far should these businesses be away from sensitive uses? And those sensitive uses are typically churches, schools, daycares, parks, et cetera. So there's usually kind of buffers, as you can kind of picture it, around those sensitive uses that you need to stay away from. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of variables when it goes into picking a site for cannabis. That's just the compliance related stuff. After that, it's where can I run a profitable business. So once you have that short list of sites that can work, now you get into like the traditional commercial real estate decision making, demographics, traffic counts, that kind of stuff. So all of that stuff that we do, as you can imagine, for maybe social equity operators or operators that don't have a real big engine behind them, or maybe restricted in terms of their capital that they have to put to the project, it's a hard task to find a compliant green zone real estate site without a partner. So there's some things that we're doing at Zone to try to democratize that process a little bit, which we can talk about. But one, and I'll end it here, and then we can maybe open it up for everybody else. But one kind of major roadblock that you run into is, let's say someone was just issued a conditional license, and the municipality they want to operate in has opted in, but they're currently working through their zoning process. Sometimes to publish a brand new ordinance around cannabis, that could take 6 months, 9 months, longer in some cases. So that hurdle around like, hey, getting some feedback from local planners and city officials as to what are they thinking, participating in the conversation, being an active an active partner through the process is difficult, time consuming, but necessary to understand, where will you eventually be able to house a cannabis business. So I'll stop there for now, but.
One thing that always confuses me about this whole industry, you have places like Massachusetts and Colorado, Arizona, other places that it has been established and has been working successfully or somewhat successfully. And they have proven track records. Why don't states that just license go to these places? And send the cities and towns officials to places like that so they can learn a little bit about it and how would benefit them. Puzzling.
Yeah, and they do. So there are some cross-border conversations. A lot of times you'll see maybe one of the first few municipalities to opt in, they will publish an ordinance that they've either had, significant legal advice around, or they've benchmarked off of another maybe neighboring municipality in a different state. And sometimes there's a waterfall effect or a cascade effect after that. So you'll see, maybe the later opt-ins, the later municipalities to opt in, they will kind of not copy, but they will emulate the same structure around that same ordinance, maybe just change some of the variables. But there is a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, every neighborhood is different. Every community is different. They've got different demographics, and there are politics at play. So, in Connecticut, there's 169 municipalities. That's a lot of different, government administrations dealing with the same topic, and they all have different opinions about it. So,
we'll have to wait till it becomes federally legal for that to truly happen, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's going to be soon, right?
Yeah, next week.
I was just at an event about a month ago, and Sean Collins, the executive director of the CCC, was emphasizing, how much he's been working with Connecticut, Vermont, and New Hampshire on the legislation that they're going to be putting in place over time. So hopefully we see some regulations that mimic the success that Massachusetts has had. But that being said, as we all know, everyone's a bit nuanced and wants to do things, their own way. And Berekk, just to pile on top of what you said, I think you're spot on, and the ground up approach and taking that is definitely important. And vetting out different municipalities is key. And anything on top of that, I'd say to any applicant is, the more information you have around your business plan and the type of facility that you're looking to pursue, the more information you have, the better, armed you are to have those discussions with the municipalities. So.
Okay, I think we touched on some of this for the next question, but maybe we can go in a little more detail. What are some issues that city and towns are having that are delaying operators from opening in their area? And anyone that has questions can leave it in the chat box or the Q&A box below on the screen. So that's open to anyone that wants to chime in on that question.
Well, as far as what I see is noise and smell, from my perspective, is always a big hurdle. A lot of facilities are abutting residential areas, and the sound of the mechanical equipment is always an issue. And of course, any hint of an odor will really upset neighbors. So those are two things that can end up being an extremely expensive addition to a construction cost to properly mitigate it.
But George, don't most cannabis operators try to mitigate that before they even open up?
They do, but it's to what extent it has to be done. So, for example, a generator, let's say, you can order it with an acoustic sound jacket, which is something installed at the factory, which is a relatively modest upcharge. But then it can be taken a step further. You can start to have to build sound walls to encompass all of the mechanical equipment that will further mitigate sound. I've had issues where the town wouldn't let any equipment go on the roof of the building because they were worried about the sound being transmitted easier. So there was a designated spot where everything had to fit, and it ended up being very expensive to mitigate that. So there's definitely different levels of mitigation, both on sound and smell, that can make it very challenging.
Anyone have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just kind of tacking on to what roadblocks or what things at the city level could be restricting people from opening, and definitely odor is a big one. I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of concern around that. The technology is getting really good around mitigating that, but kind of just tacking on to what I said earlier about published ordinance to go off of. So like an operator, they could say, I want to be in this municipality, and the municipality could still be working on officially publishing their ordinance. So that's the biggest one. To receive final approval from the state, you do need whatever conditional use permit or conditional use approval that's required at the municipality to be able to get that state license. So you can see it's a chicken or the egg. You need the municipality to fully opt in and get that ordinance drafted and published, and then you also need to go through the conditional use process, which could take a long time. So there's a lot of roadblocks, kind of time barriers there. I'd say that's probably the biggest one that I see on my end. Working to getting open, besides obviously the construction related stuff that George is working through.
Okay, well, we do have a question that has come in, which might fit what we just talked about, from Chuck Bannock. Are there specific architects or design firms that are familiar with successful designing of these facilities? I think we all know that answer.
Hey, George, do you want to take that one?
He just shakes his head.
Definitely there are some that I'd recommend. Basically, it's those who have successfully done it. There's a definite learning curve, and to hire an architect and or an engineering firm that has not dealt with it before, there will definitely be learning mistakes made. So they're definitely a fairly mid-sized group of folks that do it and do a lot of it.
Well, just so that's kind of clarified for Chuck, I would suggest anyone that's doing a build out of a cannabis facility go to experienced construction company. In the long run, and I think we talked about this before, George, is someone has to do their due diligence before they even break ground. So you know what your design is going to be, what kind of construction is needed, and all of that has to be with an experienced company in that field.
Yeah, and great way to segue into the next question too.
So what would you say? What would you say to a cannabis operator who is looking to land to build a grow facility?
So the worst part is that, as we talked about 7 minutes ago, you can't choose just any place in a municipality. It's got to be a zone. and finding something very specific in a very specific zone is often difficult. So from my perspective, as I look at a building, there's a wish list of things that you want, and then you have to prioritize things that you either want or need. So in a perfect world, you want really high ceilings, you want a fairly new building, you prefer it to be built for heavy industrial use, so your floor systems and your roof systems are robust. You can hang a lot of things off of them. You wouldn't want any windows in it, or as few windows as possible. You'd want ample access to power and or gas. So you develop this list of things that make an easy or a good cannabis site. And as you look at your options in what's available to you, you have to prioritize what is a desire and what is a need. And that's often a very difficult thing. And in my opinion, sometimes the incorrect site is chosen because the person choosing the site doesn't know what they should be looking for. So it's important to have an educated, experienced architect, as well as a builder that has done it before as well, to help guide that process.
As well as someone like Berekk, because, you know, he knows all the zoning rules. He knows
Yes.
What will work in what areas. So
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
seen
I
a
would
lot of
just,
people coming to you.
yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, to the purpose of the question, once you've identified maybe the 10 or 15 parcels that can actually be used, and sometimes it is that low in a municipality or in an area, you know, now you get into the stuff that we're talking about, you know, specific development needs. A lot of times it can be land, and you've got to work a creative deal and say, how are we going to fit this, in some cases, a square peg into a round hole. And so yeah, we definitely are running into this a lot. We typically stay in our lane, so we're not a developer. We don't do, you know, active construction projects. We to the Q&A submission, to Chuck's point, we typically have a Rolodex, or we do have a Rolodex of cannabis specific professionals that can get the job done. We can loop into a project, and that ranges from everyone from land use attorneys to architects, design, construction, et cetera, depending on the area of the country. So yeah, it's a very common you know, assessment. I think we're going to get into it in a little bit, but all the big things, utilities, water needs, you know, all that stuff is extremely important to focus on.
Elwin, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just say that, you know, as you know, that list, you know, you'd say 10 to 15, you know, potential opportunities for a location. You know, as a cultivator or manufacturer, keep in mind that you know, you can move that product wherever you want in the state. So I wouldn't be tied to a certain location as a wholesaler. That product's going to move, you know, wherever it needs to go. So really focusing on what George and Berekk have mentioned regarding, you know, finding a good building that's going to fit all the needs for your cultivation facility, and manufacturing, and find something that works for you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to skip the next question because it's kind of repetitive and fits what we just talked about. So now we'll talk about the important thing. Since utilities are a major factor in a facility, what are some things you can use that can make an operation be more efficient to operate as far as energy? You know, also, I would say water also being an issue.
So there are, you know, the things that really suck up a lot of energy are grow facilities, and a lot of people do water reclamation. They'll take the condensate water from the mechanical equipment. They'll reuse that. They'll take table water. They'll recirculate that and reuse it. I've seen it done with varying degrees of success, everything that I've mentioned. Energy efficient materials like lighting is always being improved upon. And HVAC equipment, there's a whole host of different types of equipment that can be utilized that will use less energy. And you know, it's always a real hard look at the ROI on these things, because they can be significantly more expensive. So as far as things like solar or wind generation, I don't see much of it. It's primarily, I see people just trying to make the existing space as efficient as possible.
That's interesting. Not a lot of solar. I would think that would be very big in the industry.
People always talk about it at the beginning phases of the project, the planning phases, and it always seems to be pushed aside.
And you
Yeah, and
know,
I would echo that. I don't see as much of the sustainable energy resources being used. Not that it's our expertise, but our CEO, Brian McLaren, he has a deep background in sustainability, spent some time with waste management, and it's a hot topic for him, and I think a long-term vision for us to be an active partner in bringing the industry forward towards that. I don't have anything specific to add, related to what that looks like, but I think given just the basic nature of the cannabis industry, really we should be focused on making it a priority, right? Just given that this is an organic plant that we're dealing with in a lot of ways. The only thing I would add related to the question is, I think in certain parts of the country, and depending on local regulations, greenhouses can be more energy efficient for sure as far as power goes, and outdoor grows, which are not as common depending on the geography. Those are areas that when we look towards maybe potential federal legalization, you could potentially see cross-border transportation logistics in Elwin's world, bringing product from areas that it is more energy efficient, and transporting those to other parts of the country. I mean, we're in Arizona, where all the grows, obviously, for the most part, are fully indoor, and you can imagine what the power requirements are to run an operation at this time of year in 110-degree weather. So yeah, for us, it's something that we want to continue to be an active partner in the discussion, and pushing forward. But there's more and more technology coming out that I think is interesting and worth looking at.
Yeah, I think, to echo, I mean, the cannabis industry is still really new, and I'm sure the technology is going to evolve over time. I just don't think it's there just yet. And, these plants demand a lot of light, and that's going to drive up your operating costs. So you just have to keep that in mind and, educate yourself on what's out there for best solutions to mitigate those costs, but they're going to exist no matter what. So you just got to factor that in.
well, anyone that's looking to invest into this industry has to understand that this is a very temperamental plant, and you have to have the right water, the right lighting, air quality, soil, all of that. If any of that is not have the right content to it, you can't do anything. and you might as well just close up shop. Okay, let's move on. Is there a common design for a building out a facility, or is it each one have a customized build?
I would say that there is no common design, but there is commonality in the flow of traffic, and that's demanded by the plant. So, as we mentioned before, there's compromises that have to be made in selecting sites. So the perfect site is never an option, and the layout is typically different, but you'll always see the same flow of traffic and prioritized flows of traffic between rooms and areas.
Obviously you have to start with the grow facilities in a new market like this. So at what point do you start doing build outs for dispensaries, recreational dispensaries?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that there are groups out there that we're working with that are looking to take retail properties, I guess, under their control. So that could be anything from a purchase option to a lease option. Basically, it's, giving them the exclusive right to use the space if and when they're ready, or if and when they get licensed. That's not free. That takes money to hold the property. So again, there's risk there, but plans and specifics around where they might want to locate, that's happening now. So going back a little bit to the kind of the process through zoning and setbacks and finding those sites. Once you get through all that, it's not as easy as just approaching any landlord and saying, hey, I want to open up a retail cannabis dispensary. It's if it's for lease, if it's available, if it's for lease, that property owner might have debt financing on the property that could disqualify it. They could have insurance that disqualifies cannabis use. So there's a whole set of other variables once you get past the zoning requirements, and obviously the utilities and everything for a cultivation facility. But we do a lot of off-market stuff. So if there's listeners that are maybe property owners or operators on the call or on the webinar, we do a ton of off-market deals where you're approaching, kind of door knocking, and explaining, who we are, what we're doing, and coming up with a creative deal structure that makes sense for everybody. But in a lot of cases, that's kind of what you're left with, because all the available stuff has already been called on by just about every other commercial real estate professional. So it's a race to the finish line. There's a land grab for sure, and we're kind of right in the middle of it, in Connecticut right now.
People operated once told me, a cannabis operator, he told me that opening up a facility, for a grow and for dispensaries, it's like having a big pile of money in a big hole in front of it, and you have a bulldozer and you just keep pushing it into the hole because it keeps going, cost a fortune.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know if that's not going to change until maybe when it's legalized, federally. But it's a costly proposition. And
yeah, and it's primarily the limited license markets that are like that. I think other parts of the country, like New Mexico or Oklahoma, not Oklahoma now with their moratorium, but like open market states, it's a little different, right? It's a little bit more like traditional commercial real estate. But in the limited license states where there's going to be a very specific number of licenses, or it's going to be restricted in any way, yeah, you end up in that the bulldozer scenario, and it's not cheap to participate. And that's the big conundrum between, we're not talking about this today, but between social equity and running an efficient limited license program. It's really difficult to give true social equity operators the ability to compete with the likes of a national operator who has the resources to go out get these deals done.
And Elwin, that's why I said that you must have that warehouse filled with money.
Yeah, Berekk, to your point, and on top of that, Connecticut's a little different where, it's a lottery system, right? So you can't really anticipate when you're going to get that license, and there's a lot of variables at play behind that even. So, unfortunately, cannabis, no matter where you are, is somewhat of a waiting game. But yeah, luck of the draw makes it even more tough.
So are we seeing investors in this market from other markets, or are these newcomers?
Yeah, I'll start. We have clients that are from outside of Connecticut that are partnering up with local Connecticut residents, and applying that way. So we see both. We've got Connecticut residents that are by themselves that are looking to apply and set up shop, but also people from out of state too.
So do they have to be a Connecticut resident or partnered with someone that is a Connecticut resident to open up a facility?
I'm sorry, I don't have this off the top of my head. There is a requirement around residency. I don't know if it's the individual or something related to the business, but I can follow up on that. But yeah, there's something related to needing some sort of a Connecticut partnership on the ground there to be able to apply.
Okay. All right, let's move on. What do you find are the most common issues in a cannabis facility build out? Are there any issues? Must be smooth.
They build themselves.
Yeah.
Right now, I would say supply chain issues. You can figure out how to build nearly anything if you have time and money, but not being able to get things is posing a real challenge when you're otherwise done with a project and you're waiting for your electric gear for another 6 months after that. There's no good way to pitch that.
Well, what about a repurposing of a property? Now, Berekk, you said that you buy some of the properties. Are these are existing properties? Are you repurposing them?
Yeah, so our current portfolio contains two large scale cultivation facilities. One is kind of fully indoor in the metro Phoenix area. Another one is more expansive. It's out in the Chino Valley, so it's outside of kind of rural. It's in rural Arizona. It was more of a full, ground up development. So that's 4 years basically in the works, and we're just now getting into kind of the middle phases of it. But the Metro Phoenix property was something that was purchased and repurposed, and so that's definitely common. Looking at things like in other industries like printing, so print shops are interesting. They've got heavy power already in most cases. You can kind of gut them and repurpose those relatively easily. So yeah, it's not to say you need to do a ground up development by any means. There's other opportunities for sure.
I would say that if you're looking at an existing building, things that I hinted at before, roof structures that aren't capable of suspending equipment is a real hard thing to get past. That I would say is one of the top issues. Aside from that, any sort of mold growing materials, woods, certain insulations, that's not great, but you can get past it by just building rooms within the space. Flooring, if there's a floor beneath the facility, and same thing as your roof, if your floor can't suspend or can't take the traffic without deflection, that can certainly be an issue, because it could compromise the seal of a room, and it could also obviously hinder your ability to place equipment. But again, there's a whole list of things that make a great option and a terrible option, and those are probably the top items on the list.
Okay, well, the next question, I think we covered that pretty much on the due diligence needed. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which Berekk, you had brought up. How does a cannabis project impact the community? Oh, you're
Sorry. Yeah, we touched on this a
like
little
me.
bit in the we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think odor and safety are the two big ones that I think are most commonly talked about when a community is looking at either opting in or discussing, whether or not cannabis is right for them. We talked about odor already, so I'll kind of skip over that one. I think safety is an interesting one, and there's been quite a few studies now. I'm not going to reference them on this webinar, but they're out there around, what happens when a dispensary or cultivation facility opens up in a neighborhood, to crime rates, to drug-related violence or drug-related, charges, teen drug use. All of the studies that have at least been published and that I've seen have shown positive impacts by cannabis facilities opening up in a neighborhood. And it's not a blanket statement, but most of the work, given the maturity of Colorado's market, most of the work was done in Colorado around this. So I'm sure some more studies will come out over time, but I think the specific point to make about safety is that when the state, when each state is going through their rules and regs process, that's one of the biggest things they focus on, is like manned security on the perimeter, internal security systems, monitoring, parking lots being lit, well lit at really all hours of the day. The safety requirements and really the operating requirements in general for a dispensary or cultivation facility are well above and beyond what a normal business is required to do. So inherently you have a property that might have been sitting vacant or was in disrepair being revitalized in an area, but also these safety requirements increasing or decreasing the potential for any sort of related crimes in that area. So that's just a point that I wanted to make. I think that some of the things that planners are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, they tend to get bull rushed by operators asking for updates and like, hey, what's taking so long? Where can I put my business? But these are pretty sensitive issues, and it's the first time that many of these planners are having to discuss this topic. So we tend to do a lot of work working with municipalities, not lobbying, but like educating them on what could happen and how to potentially look at an issue. And so I think that there's a lot of variables at play. There's a lot of things to weigh, and the data is starting to come out in terms of what we talked about in terms of safety, and even there's some studies about property values increasing after a cannabis dispensary opens up nearby. So all that stuff I think will start to flesh itself out. But it is a very I only say it to say that I think there's a little bit of there's a lot of credit to go towards the city officials that are having to deal with these issues on a very short shot clock in most cases.
And these issues don't really come up to this extent if someone wanted to open a liquor store either.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And
It
also
is-
Right.
to your point, the amount of money that's put into, let's say, a dispensary, put into an existing building, it's turning it into a palace basically. When you could sell booze out of it without putting a dime into it, really. Put a lock on the door and call it done.
Exactly.
And you have signs in all over the place, which you don't see that with a cannabis facility. They're usually very well designed and very clean looking.
Yeah,
So-
we've been around since 2018 moving cash, and we've been incident free, knock on wood. So I think, in general, as far as crimes related to cannabis, I think there was a robbery in Maine earlier this year, which was at a dispensary in the middle of the woods. And they caught the guy a day later. And one other petty crime in Fall River, but that's about it as far as all I've heard. But the amount of jobs that open up for folks in the community, and the amount of money that's given back to different charities, folks, all the social equity work that's being done, kind of echoes back to what Berekk was saying regarding the positive impacts.
Now, does Connecticut have a cannabis commission in place already?
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Yep.
Okay. So they're taking all the right steps, then putting all their ducks in order, so they can function well, and like I said at the beginning, with all of these markets that have been operating already, there's so much knowledge out there on how to do it the right way. I would think that a lot of them would find that out from these markets. So anyone's last words? We're coming to the close of this. Last words on what they see of the future of the Connecticut cannabis market.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I think everyone's excited to see how it rolls out, and I think we're still really early, to be honest, in the whole process. So, but I think that's good. I think that's good to have these types of conversations early on, and hopefully, depending on when somebody's listening to this down the road, it's useful. And yeah, I think all signs point to Connecticut being a strong market over time, and we'll be excited to see that happen.
And
Yeah, I'd just say exciting times. I think this, like with Massachusetts, a couple years in, the amount of growth we've seen, and I think the future is bright for Connecticut. And to any of the listeners, get out, get to events, network with folks within the industry, educate yourself. Don't be afraid to develop partnerships with folks. And just continue to grow from there, and best of luck.
And George, you have any last words for the opportunities out there?
I'd say raise your funds early and have enough.
Well, I appreciate all of you joining us today and participating in this webinar. I want to thank our sponsors for today: Inspire Technology, Northmark, Champion Elevator, U.S. Pavement Services, Northeastern Savings Bank, and Margot DeStefano Architects. Excuse me. And I want to thank you all. I'm going to go and have a cup of tea with some honey and lemon, and I hope you all have a pleasant afternoon.
Thanks for hanging in there, Rick,
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
guys.
Thank you. And watch for this on the podcast.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.